The galaxy is filled with countless voices and countless stories drifting across the stars like whispers carried by endless winds. Some stories are songs of victory, some are tales of sorrow, and some are strange myths that no one truly believes. Among these myths, there's one story that always brings laughter when told in great halls, or in dark taverns, or in the chambers of alien councils. It is the story of the Death World, a place so cruel and wild that even nightmares would fear to be born. There, and from this world, it is said, comes a species that is stubborn enough to endure every danger and still rise again. The aliens tell this story with smiles and mocking tones. They speak of storms that last for weeks, of oceans that try to swallow the land, of beasts with teeth like blades and eyes that glow in the night. They say this world was called Earth, a small blue planet far from the trade routes and far from the safe light of the great civilizations, a planet no one had ever visited and no one had ever seen, and yet the stories spread like smoke in the wind, never fading, always returning to stir wonder and laughter. In the great councils of the galaxy, leaders and scholars sit beneath high crystal ceilings while servants pour glowing drinks. And whenever the topic of the Death World rises, voices ring with amusement. They say no creature could live on such a planet. No mind could grow in a place that cruel. No people could build fire or tools in a land where everything seeks to kill them. The myths of the Death World are nothing but tales for the young. Stories to thrill hatchlings, bedtime warnings dressed in fancy words, yet in quiet corners. Some whisper that every myth hides a seed of truth, and if such a world exists, then its children would be unlike any other. But the laughter of the powerful drowns those whispers, and the story is brushed away once again until the next night, when it returns like an ember that refuses to die. The myths speak of people who do not break, people who fight against storms and beasts and hunger, people who fall and rise again and again. They speak of humans, a word that rolls strangely on alien tongues, a word said with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. The legends claim that humans bleed like others yet keep moving, that their bodies heal fast, that their minds burn with strange fire. But such claims are too wild to be trusted. And so the galaxy laughs, for who would believe that frail creatures of flesh could carry such strength? The story is told in countless ways. On one world, an elder says humans hunted beasts with nothing but sharp stones. On another world, a scholar says humans walked into deserts with no water and came back alive. In a distant market, a trader swears he once saw a human lift a weight that would crush a warrior beast. Every version grows more absurd than the last, and each retelling makes the laughter louder. But sometimes in the silence after laughter fades, a shadow of unease remains. For if even a fragment of the myth is true, then somewhere in the galaxy there exists a people born from endless struggle, and such a people would be both dangerous and unstoppable. Yet it is easier to laugh than to fear, so the galaxy chooses laughter, for fear would mean preparing for what may come. And no one wishes to believe that the impossible could walk among the stars. One night in the Grand Council of Zareth, where the finest minds of 3 sectors gather, the Death World myth rises again. A young speaker begins to recite the story, describing storms that tear forests from the ground, creatures that can smell blood from miles away, and diseases that kill in a single day. The hall fills with amusement. Some clap their hands. Others click their mandibles in joy. One senator even raises a toast to the foolish idea that anyone could survive such a place. The myth is declared a comedy, a story unfit for science or history, and the room echoes with prideful laughter. But what none of them know, what none of them could guess, is that the myth is waiting beyond the edge of their knowledge. The story they dismiss as a joke is alive, breathing, and walking closer with each day. For legends are not always lies. Sometimes they are warnings written in the voices of old travelers, and sometimes they are prophecies waiting for their time to arrive. The galaxy drifts on. The councils continue their laughter. The traders repeat their tales. The hatchlings fall asleep to the wild stories of humans, and across the stars a silence waits. The silence of a truth preparing to reveal itself. Soon the myth will rise from imagination into reality, and when it does, laughter will no longer be the answer. For on a quiet night, beneath endless stars, the first sign comes, a signal faint but clear, a voice carried across the void saying words none expected, a voice that does not belong to any empire or any council, a voice that carries the name long forgotten yet never erased, and the name is Earth. And in that moment, before the galaxy even understands what has arrived, the myth they mocked begins to step forward, and the laughter that once filled the halls is replaced by silence, a silence that feels heavier than war. For when the myth becomes real, every word told in jest turns into a memory of arrogance, and every smile turns into the first taste of fear. The chamber of the Grand Council stretched high into the sky like a mountain of glass and stone. Lights shimmered and long beams and banners of 100 worlds hung heavy across the walls. The seats were filled with delegates and lords and scholars, each wearing robes or armor that marked their home. Their voices blended into a rising tide, sharp words bouncing against crystal pillars as they argued over trade, over borders, over war and peace. Yet when the old myths of the death world were mentioned, laughter once again filled the air. The council leader raised his long hands and called for order. His voice was calm but heavy. He said that too many times this foolish tale distracted serious minds. He told them that legends of Earth, of death world humans, were nothing more than fireside entertainment, and no council should waste its time with fantasy. Around him the chamber roared with agreement. Many nodded. Others pounded the floor with heavy staffs. The myth was declared nothing but a distraction, a shadow given life by childish imagination. But not all voices agreed. In the corner of the chamber, an elder with silver skin and tired eyes rose slowly. He spoke of records carved on old stones found on forgotten moons. He spoke of travelers who once vanished when they followed a path toward the sector where Earth was said to exist. He said that stories do not survive across millennia without some seed of truth, but his words were met with sighs and smirks. One delegate clapped mockingly. Another leaned forward and whispered that the elder was too weak and too old to see reason. And again the sound of laughter spread like fire. Yet there was an unease beneath the mirth, a silence hiding behind the joy. The myths always returned, no matter how often they were buried, no matter how hard the council dismissed them, like a whisper that claws at the mind, refusing to be forgotten. For deep down in the heart of every thinking creature lies the fear that something unknown waits beyond the edge of the map, something they cannot control, something that mocks their pride. The leader spoke again, louder now, telling all that science had mapped the stars, that no such death world existed, that every sector had been scanned, charted, and claimed. His words echoed across the chamber. Yet even as he declared the myth a lie, shadows danced across the walls like waiting answers, and unseen by any in the chamber, far away in the black, something was already moving. The arguments continued. Scholars brought forward scrolls and data to mock the old tales. Traders laughed as they swore that if such a place truly existed, they would have sold its wonders long ago. Warriors sneered that if such humans were real, they would have challenged the great empires long before now. And so the chamber filled with arrogance, each voice trying to outshine the others with pride and mockery. But then, in the middle of the noise, a sound broke across the hall. It was not a voice from the chamber, it was not a whisper from a delegate. It was a pulse sharp and clear, flowing through every device, every screen, every translator. It was a signal not from the council itself, but from the edge of space. And the hall fell silent as the strange rhythm repeated again and again. The technicians at the side scrambled to capture the data. Their fingers moved quickly, eyes wide with confusion. The pulse became a pattern, the pattern became words, and then at last, through the quiet chamber, a translation was spoken by the cold voice of the machines. The words were simple, direct, and yet filled with weight. They said, "This is a representative of Earth." The chamber froze. Every alien eye widened. Every hand stiffened. The mocking faces turned pale with silence. The name that had been nothing more than a joke was now spoken with clarity, not from a storyteller, not from a fool, but from the stars themselves. The chamber trembled with unease. The leader demanded answers. He shouted for proof. He ordered the technicians to explain, and the screens flickered to life. They showed a small craft drifting on the edge of the system, scarred and weathered, moving with stubborn power, not marked by any known empire, not listed in any archive. It carried no insignia except for one small symbol on its side, a sphere of blue and green. The delegates whispered in shock, voices overlapping. Some said it must be a trick, a false signal, a prank sent by enemies. Others whispered that it could not be, that the myths were too old to come alive. But the ship remained, moving with slow intent, carrying the name they all had laughed at for centuries. The signal repeated again and again, each word striking deeper than the last. This is a representative of Earth. The chamber that had been filled with arrogance now sat in trembling silence. Some stared at the floor, others at the screens. The elder who had been mocked only moments before stood taller, his tired eyes burning with truth. He whispered that the seed of the myth had sprouted, that the time of doubt was over. The council leader tried to speak, but his voice cracked, for no command, no denial, could erase the reality before them. The myth they had mocked was now orbiting their world, a presence no laughter could destroy, and as the ship drifted closer, the galaxy felt the first breath of a new chapter. The council of doubt had been silenced. The myth had answered with reality, and the story that was told with laughter was now written in the sky above them, a story that no one could escape, a story that would change everything. The ship hung above the alien capital world like a silent shadow against the stars, its surface scarred and rough, edges marked with burns of past battles, its body trembling but steady, not the polished steel of the great empires, not the clean design of merchant fleets, but something raw and alive, something born not in safety, but in endless struggle. The watchers in the council chamber stared at the screens, their hearts heavy with disbelief, their minds searching for answers that would not come. The voice came again, slow and calm, carried by the machines of translation. It said, "This is a representative of Earth. Permission to land is requested." The words echoed across the chamber, filling the silence like a storm-breaking stone. Many shook their heads. Others muttered that it must be a trick, yet the signal was clear. The symbol of the blue and green sphere glowed on the ship's hull, glowing like a memory reborn. The council leader rose from his seat, his body shaking. He demanded that the ship identify itself further, demanded proof that it was more than an echo of an old myth, but the voice simply answered with steady calm, repeating the same line. "This is a representative of Earth. Permission to land is requested. No more, no less. No begging, no pride, only calm certainty." And that calm frightened the chamber more than any roar of threat ever could. The technicians scanned the ship, their eyes wide with confusion. The readings showed technology strange yet strong. Engines repaired with care, weapons absent, but armor thick with scars. The design did not match any empire. It was old in some places, new in others, as if built piece by piece for broken parts. Yet still it lived, still it flew, a contradiction that no science could easily explain. For how could a ship born from hardship fly with such stubborn power? The chamber argued in rising voices. Some shouted to destroy it before it reached the surface. Others demanded to study it. Others whispered that it should be ignored. But none dared move, for something about the silence of the ship held them still. Something about the steady signal felt heavier than any weapon, as if the myth itself stood before them and waited. Outside the council halls, across the capital world, people gathered in markets and streets, eyes turned to the sky, screens filled with the image of the drifting ship. Whispers spread like wildfire. The word Earth spoken for the first time not as a joke, but as a warning. Fear and awe mixed in every voice. Parents pulled their children close. Merchants closed their stalls. Soldiers gripped their weapons. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, without rush, the ship began to move, its engines glowing faintly, guiding it slowly through the thin air of the upper sky. The council leader shouted for defense systems, for shields, for interceptors, but his orders were late. The ship did not attack. It simply descended, slow and steady, like a stone falling not to crush, but to rest, as if it knew no one could stop it, as if it carried the weight of inevitability. The landing fields of the capital trembled as the ship touched down, dust rising in thick clouds, lights flickering across its battered frame. Soldiers surrounded it, weapons raised, shields ready. Yet no shot was fired, for no weapon felt enough against something born from myth. The ramp of the ship lowered with a long hiss, and silence deeper than space fell across the field. From the shadows of the ship, a figure appeared, tall and narrow, walking with steady steps, not rushed, not slow, simply certain. The figure wore simple clothing torn in places, armored in others. Not polished armor of empires, but patched and scarred. Across the body marks of survival were carved, burns on the arms, scars on the face. A body shaped not by comfort, but by endless trial. The first human the galaxy had seen in living memory stepped forward into the light. Gasps filled the crowd of soldiers. Whispers spread like wind. Impossible, they muttered. Yet the figure moved closer, eyes forward, steady and calm. The gravity of the alien world heavier than most, yet the human did not stumble, did not bend. Each step carried weight like stone. Each breath carried power, as if the very ground accepted the presence of one who came from a world harsher than any of them could imagine. The council delegates watching through screens leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts unsteady. They had expected a monster or a frail creature, but what they saw was something simple yet unbroken, something alive in a way that shook their souls. For in the scars of the human, they saw survival, and in the calm of the human, they saw strength. The myths they had mocked now stood before them in flesh and blood. The human reached the line of soldiers, their weapons raised, their bodies trembling. And in that moment, the human paused, then lifted one hand slowly, extending it outward, a simple gesture, a gesture of peace, of greeting, of ancient meaning carried across countless cultures. The human offered a handshake. The soldiers did not move, fear locking their bodies, silence weighing heavier than gravity. Yet the human stood still, hand extended, eyes calm, no weapon drawn, no threat spoken, only the waiting gesture, and the silence stretched until it felt endless, until one soldier at last, trembling, stepped forward. The soldier reached out, claws shaking, touched the human hand, and felt warmth, felt the weight of real flesh, the strength of real bone. And in that touch the myth was broken and reborn. The galaxy's greatest joke became truth, and fear spread faster than laughter ever had. For the death world had sent a child, and that child now stood among them. The handshake ended, yet the weight of it remained heavier than iron across every heart watching the scene. The soldier who had touched the human stepped back in silence, his claws trembling with the memory of warmth that should not exist. The crowd of warriors surrounding the ship did not lower their weapons, but none dared fire. None dared even breathe too loud, for the presence of a stranger was like a mountain pressing against them, not in force, but in certainty, a power quiet yet undeniable. The human lowered his hand and lifted his eyes toward the halls that rose beyond the landing field. Eyes sharp yet calm, eyes filled with scars of storms and fire. And in that look the soldiers saw something far older than themselves. The council ordered that the human be brought inside. Some demanded chains and cages. Others whispered that such disrespect could awaken wrath. But the human moved forward without restraint, his steps steady as guards circled around him, weapons shaking as they pointed, yet never fired. The gates of the grand hall opened wide. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed like thunder. Torches burned blue fire across the walls. Banners of alien empires swayed above like shadows of pride. And into this place of laughter and mockery walked the child of Death World. Every delegate watched in silence, their seats high above the floor, their eyes wide and their bodies stiff. Some leaned back in fear. Some leaned forward with hunger for knowledge. Yet all felt the same weight. The myth had stepped into their hall and stood where only legends were spoken. The human did not kneel, did not bow, only paused for a moment, then lifted one arm slightly in a gesture of greeting, calm and respectful, but not submissive. A gesture that said we stand as equals, not as prey and predator. The council leader rose from his seat, his long cloak dragging against the floor, his eyes narrow and filled with pride and fear blended into one. He asked the human to speak, his voice loud, trembling yet defiant. He demanded to know who the stranger was, demanded to know what world could give birth to such a being, demanded to know why they had come. The chamber shook with the echo of his voice, and silence followed as I turned to the human. The human breathed once, slow and deep, then spoke, his words simple, carried by the translation machines into every tongue. He said, "I am a representative of Earth. My world is a place you know as Death World. My people are those you mocked as myth. I come not as conqueror, not as enemy, but as one who extends a hand." The words were calm and heavy, and in their simplicity they struck harder than any speech of fire could have done. Murmurs broke across the chamber. Some whispered in disbelief, others in fear, others in wonder. The elder who had once spoken of truth rose with tears in his tired eyes, saying softly that the seed of myth had become the tree of reality, that the laughter of centuries now bent into silence. The council leader struck the ground with his staff, demanding silence, demanding control. But even he felt his heart tremble at the sight before him. The human stepped forward and told them of storms that tear down mountains, of seas that swallow entire cities, of beasts that hunt in endless forests, of plagues that burn through blood like fire. Yet through it all humanity survived. Through it all they learned to stand again, to adapt, to fight, to build. He lifted his hands, showing the scars carved into his flesh. He said, "These are the marks of my world. These are the gifts of survival. And every scar is a memory of battle endured, a battle that did not end me, a battle that made me stronger." The chamber fell into silence deeper than any before, for in those scars they saw the truth. No scholar could deny it. No warrior could laugh. Every line upon his skin told a story written not by words, but by pain and endurance, a story of a world that gave nothing freely, a world that demanded strength or death. And yet from such cruelty had risen not monsters but people. People who could stand before the greatest council of the galaxy with calm eyes and steady breath. The council leader tried again to command. He asked why humanity had come after so many centuries of silence. Why reveal themselves now? Why not earlier? The human answered with the same calm voice. He said, "Because now you are ready to see. Because myths cannot remain myths forever. Because truth comes when it must. And because the galaxy must learn that survival is not weakness but strength." Gasps filled the chamber. Some delegates bowed their heads. Some shook their heads in denial. But none could erase the weight of the human's presence. None could erase the simple fact that the myth was alive before them. The elders stepped forward trembling. He asked the human what they sought, what they wanted, and the human extended his hand once more, repeating, "I come not as conqueror. I come as one who offers a hand." And in that gesture the chamber saw both fear and hope. For if such beings could survive the cruelty of Death World, then their friendship could be stronger than steel. But if such beings turned to wrath, then nothing in the galaxy could withstand them. The chamber was caught between awe and terror, between pride and humility, and every heart beat faster as they realized that the age of laughter had ended. The strangers stood there calm and unbroken, scars shining under the council lights, voice steady as mountains, hand extended in peace. And in that moment the galaxy felt the weight of a turning age, for myths had walked into their hall, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hall was silent as the human stood before the council, his hand still extended, though none dared move closer. The light of the torches flickered across the scars of his skin, and every mark seemed to tell a story older than the empires gathered in that chamber. At last the human lowered his arm and spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying the weight of storms and fire. He said, "You laugh at the word Death World, you laugh at the stories of Earth, but you do not know the truth. You do not know what it means to be born in a place that does not want you alive." He began to describe his world, not with pride, but with honesty. He said, "On Earth the skies do not remain calm, storms rise without warning, tearing trees from the ground, waves rise taller than mountains, swallowing shores and ships. Lightning falls with a roar that shakes the bones of all who hear it. Yet humanity endures, for we learn to shelter, we learn to stand again when walls are broken, and we learn to fight against the very sky if we must." He spoke of the beast that walked his world, beast with claws sharper than blades, beast with eyes that glow in the dark, beast that hunt with hunger that never ends. He said, we faced them not because we were stronger, not because we were faster, but because we refused to die. When teeth tore our flesh, we rose again. When claws struck us down, we rose again. When poison burned our blood, we rose again. We learned to hunt the hunters, and we learned that fear could not rule us. He spoke of sickness that spread like fire across villages, across cities, across the land. He said plagues took children in their sleep, plagues took mothers and fathers, yet humanity fought with herbs, with fire, with knowledge. And when that was not enough, we endured until our blood itself carried memory, until our bodies learned to resist, until survival was written into our very veins. He lifted his arms, showing the marks upon them. He said, every scar is a story of a battle. My people did not lose, for even in loss, we learn, even in pain, we grow stronger. This is what it means to be a child of Earth. This is why we endure. This is why you called us myth, because no other people could imagine what it means to live where every day is a war. The chamber shook with whispers. Some delegates leaned forward in awe. Others leaned back in fear. The elder who had spoken before closed his eyes, whispering that the truth was far greater than the legends ever told. The council leader tried to stand tall, but his voice trembled as he asked, how could such a world give rise to minds, to fire, to cities, to ships? The human turned to him and said, because we had no choice. If we did not learn, we would perish. If we did not build, we would be devoured. If we did not rise together, we would be lost alone. Earth is cruel, but Earth teaches, and its lessons are carved deep into us. He told them of cold winters where frost turned rivers to stone and winds tore skin from flesh, yet families huddled together around fire, learning warmth through unity. He told them of deserts that stretched endless beneath burning suns, yet men and women walked them carrying water, sharing drops, so small, yet so precious that life itself was measured in a single sip. He told them of mountains that rose high and dared humanity to climb, and how men reached their peaks with hands torn bloody, but with eyes filled with victory. He told them of endless forests filled with shadows and predators, yet filled also with song as children laughed beneath the trees. As the words filled the chamber, the aliens began to see not just scars and storms, but people. They began to see strength born not of conquest, but of survival, strength that grew not from cruelty of heart, but from the cruelty of the world itself. Some felt envy, some felt terror, for they understood now that Earth had forged something unique, something no empire, no council, no machine could ever truly shape. The human's voice grew quiet but sharper with every word. He said, you laughed because you did not believe such a world could exist. You laughed because the idea frightened you more than you could admit. You laughed because laughter is easier than fear, but you know the truth now. You see it before you. You hear in my voice. We are not myth. We are memory. We are survival given form. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. No one in the chamber dared speak. No one dared move. Even the council leader remained frozen, his staff trembling in his hand. The elder wept softly, whispering that he had waited his whole life to hear the truth spoken by the one who lived it. The human looked across the chamber, eyes steady, scars shining like old runes, and he said one more line that fell like a hammer upon every heart. He said, if Earth did not kill us, then nothing in the stars ever will. The chamber gasped, some with fear, some with awe, some with respect, none with laughter. The myth was gone. The truth stood before them, and it was heavier and greater than any legend could have painted. The truth of Death World was not a joke. It was not a story for children. It was a warning and a promise. The warning was clear. No power could ever erase those who learned to live through endless struggle. The promise was simple. Those who endured such a place could endure anything. And in that moment, the galaxy began to understand why the myths never died, why the whispers always returned, why the story of Death World always lived in shadows, because the truth could not be buried. The truth had always been waiting for the day when the child of Earth would walk into the hall of the galaxy and speak the words no one wished to hear, yet everyone needed to know. The truth of Death World had come at last, and it would never be forgotten again. The chamber that once echoed with laughter now held only silence, yet silence itself became a sound heavy and sharp pressing against every mind. The delegates shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes locked upon the human, who stood calm and unbroken before them. The scars upon his skin glowed faintly in the light, like lines of a map carved by struggle. The council leader tightened his grip upon his staff, yet the tremor in his hand betrayed the fear that burned inside, for the myths they had mocked had revealed themselves as truth, and truth was heavier than pride. The human did not move with arrogance nor with weakness. He simply stood steady as stone, his breath calm, his voice quiet. When he spoke again, he said, "You laughed at us because you could not believe us. You laughed because you feared what believing would mean. But I tell you now, there is nothing more dangerous in the stars than a people who have survived the impossible, for we are proof that the impossible could be endured. We are proof that the impossible can be conquered." The words cut through the chamber sharper than any blade. The scholars who once argued against the myth stared down at their hands, ashamed. The warriors who once mocked leaned back, their armor suddenly heavy upon them. The traders who once scoffed thought of their fleets and trembled, for if such beings walked among the stars, then no wealth, no weapon, no power could protect them from a people who refused to die. The elder rose once more, his voice soft but clear. He said, "I told you the seed of myth was a seed of truth, and now it blooms before your very eyes." The human turned his gaze upon him and inclined his head in respect, and the elder lowered his eyes, as if unable to meet the weight of that look. The council leader shouted for order, his voice echoing across the hall. Yet even he could not erase the tension in the air. He tried to claim that this human was only one, that one did not prove an entire people. But the human raised his arm, showing again the scars carved deep into his flesh, and said, "I am not the only one. Every child of Earth carries scars. Every mother, every father, every warrior, every builder, every one of us is shaped by the same hand of survival. If I stand here today, then imagine how many others stand behind me. Imagine the strength of a people who live every day as I have lived." Fear spread like a storm across the chamber. One delegate whispered, "If they survived storms that tore mountains, then what would they do with our armies?" Another whispered, "If they faced beasts that devour cities, then what would they do with our weapons?" A third whispered, "If they endured plagues that kill in hours, then what could we unleash that would ever break them?" Every whisper added to the weight pressing upon them, until even those who mocked began to shake. The human's voice grew sharper, though still calm. He said, "You laughed because it was easier, but now you must choose. Will you fear us, or will you stand with us? Will you see us as monsters or as allies? I offer a hand, yet a hand once offered can be withdrawn. The choice is yours." The word struck deep. The meaning could not be ignored. No empire, no fleet, no power wished to admit weakness. Yet all felt it now in their bones, for here stood a being who carried the cruelty of an entire world upon his shoulders, and still lived, still breathed, still stood tall. Their laughter had turned to fear, but fear could turn into respect if they chose it, or into despair if they denied it. The council leader sank slowly into his seat, his voice softer now. He asked, "Why should we not fear you? Why should we not see you as danger?" The human looked at him with eyes calm, yet fierce, and answered, "Because we do not seek to conquer, we seek to live. As all do, we seek to walk among the stars as all do. But if you raise your hand against us, know this, the hand of Earth will not break, it will not fall, it will not vanish, it will endure, and it will answer." Every delegate felt the chill in those words, for it was not threat spoken in fire. It was truth spoken in calm, and truth is harder than any weapon. The elder bowed his head, whispering that the stars themselves would remember this day, whispering that the laughter of ages had been silenced in a single hour. The guards who had once stood ready with weapons lowered them slowly, eyes wide with awe, some even trembling with something beyond fear, something like respect, for in their hearts they knew they could not face such a being and win, not because of strength alone, but because of spirit, unbroken spirit that no force could extinguish. The traders thought of wealth and wondered if trade with such people would bring riches or ruin. The warriors thought of battle and wondered if standing against such people would mean glory or destruction. The scholars thought of history and wondered if this day would be the day that marked the turning of an age. The human stood still in the center of the hall, his silence louder than thunder, his scars brighter than flame, his presence heavier than any crown. And as the aliens stared at him, they saw not one man, but the shadow of an entire people rising behind him. Countless voices, countless stories, countless survivors born of firestorm and shadow. The fear that filled the hall was not only fear of destruction, it was fear of change, fear of truth, fear of the unknown, yet hidden within it was also the seed of respect, for deep down, even the proudest delegate knew that laughter could not erase what stood before them. Laughter could not undo reality. Laughter had ended and fear had begun. And in that fear, the galaxy took its first true step toward understanding humanity, not as myth, not as comedy, but as power, raw and undeniable power that could destroy them or save them, depending on the choice they made in that hall under the light of 1,000 torches, as the eyes of the first human ever seen beyond Earth burned steady and strong. The council chamber sat in silence, the weight of centuries of laughter now broken by a single truth. The human stood still, his body scarred, his eyes calm, his hand extended once more, not with pride, not with demand, but with patience and certainty. The silence stretched long and heavy until it became almost unbearable. Then slowly one delegate rose from his seat, his body trembling, his eyes filled with both fear and wonder. He stepped down the stairs of the great chamber, each step echoing across the walls like thunder, each step watched by 1,000 eyes. He moved until he stood before the human, and then he raised his arm and placed his hand in the hand of the stranger. The touch was simple, yet in that touch history bent. The warmth of flesh met the weight of scars, and the council gasped as if struck by lightning, for they knew what this moment meant. The myths of Earth had been laughed at for countless ages, dismissed as nonsense. Yet here before them, one of those myths had taken their hand and offered peace. The laughter that once rang across halls of power now echoed only in memory, replaced forever by a silence that trembled with awe. The human spoke, his voice quiet yet firm. He said, "The myths are no longer myths. The truth has come. You may fear us, but know this, we do not come to bring conquest. We come to bring choice, the choice to stand with us or against us, the choice to accept the hand of survival or to face it as enemy. The galaxy is vast, but no storm is greater than the storms of Earth. No shadow is darker than the nights of my world. And if we endured those storms, then we will endure anything." The words carried through the chamber like fire carried by wind, and no one dared to speak against them. The elder bowed his head, tears streaming down his worn face. He whispered that the stars had waited for this moment, that every myth, every story, every whisper had been preparing them for this day, the day when humanity would step from shadow and alight, the day when the galaxy would learn that strength is not born from ease, but from trial. The council leader sat frozen, unable to speak, for the power of the moment had taken even his pride and turned it to dust. Outside the chamber, news spread like wildfire across the capital world. Screens lit up with the image of the handshake. Crowds that had once laughed and scoffed now stood silent. Some wept, some bowed, some raised their arms in salute, for all understood, even without words, that the galaxy had changed forever. Children whispered the word Earth, as if it were sacred. Merchants whispered it with greed. Soldiers whispered it with dread. Scholars whispered it with awe. But all whispered it nonetheless. The human released the hand slowly and lowered his arm, yet the weight of that single act remained heavier than any war, heavier than any treaty, heavier than any crown. He turned his gaze across the chamber, his eyes moving from delegate to delegate, his voice steady, as he said, "Remember this moment. Remember that once you laughed at us, and now you shake our hand. Remember that strength is not in mocking, but in listening. Remember that survival is not weakness, but the root of power." The delegates felt the truth sink deep into their bones. One by one, they rose from their seats. Some bowed slightly, others simply placed a hand to their chest in silent respect. None dared laugh, none dared mock. The myth had become the foundation of a new reality. The council leader at last found his voice, though it was softer than ever before. He said, "We acknowledge you, representative of Earth. We acknowledge the truth of your world, and we acknowledge the strength of your people." The words were spoken not with joy, but with heavy respect, and perhaps with a shadow of fear, yet they were spoken nonetheless, and that alone meant the galaxy would never be the same. The human inclined his head in quiet acknowledgement. He turned to leave the chamber, his steps steady, his body calm. Guards parted before him like waves before stone. None dared touch him, none dared stop him as he walked back toward the light of the landing field, his ship waiting like a shadow of storms upon the ground. Crowds filled the edges of the field, their eyes wide, their voices hushed, as they watched the figure of myth return to his vessel. At the ramp he paused, turned once more, and spoke not only to the council, but to all who watched his words carried by screens and voices to every ear across the world. He said, "We are not here to conquer, we are here to endure. As we always have, we offer a hand, take it or refuse it, the choice is yours. But remember this, if Earth could not kill us, nothing in the stars ever will then." He turned and entered his ship. The ramp closed, the engines roared, and the vessel rose slowly into the sky, leaving the field below trembling with dust and silence. The ship drifted upward beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, into the endless dark. The people watched until it vanished into the sea of stars. And even then they did not look away, for they knew they had seen the birth of something greater than empire, greater than power. They had seen the beginning of a story that would reshape every corner of the galaxy. In the chambers of the council, no one spoke of laughter again in the streets. No one mocked the word Earth again in the markets. No traitor dismissed the story again in the homes of countless species. No parent told the myth as a joke again, for the myth was no longer a myth. It was truth carved in a memory, truth carried by a handshake, truth written across the stars themselves. And so the galaxy learned that fear can silence laughter, but respect can silence fear. And in that balance, the future waited, unknown, yet undeniable, for the first human had stepped into the Hall of Legends and left behind not conquest, but a choice that would echo through generations as the stars themselves bore witness to the handshake that changed them all.